My name is Natalie Kerrigan. I'm 33 years old, fast-track lieutenant colonel. My father scoffed loud enough to hush the entire room. He's a retired Marine Corps colonel, and today is the official promotion ceremony at Fort Banner Military Academy, the moment my name was called for elevation in rank. His voice cut through the solemn silence right as the ceremonial drums finished. I said nothing. I held my posture eyes forward. My mother passed away long ago. Since then, it's always been just him, the man who never believed I was strong enough, good enough, worthy enough. Not even when I bled for combat zones he only ever heard of through intelligence briefings. No one spoke. No one intervened. But from the back row, a 4-star general slipped his hand into his jacket pocket, pulled out a deep red identification card and raised it across his right shoulder, eyes locked on me. His gaze scorched the air, and once again, the room went still. But this time, for a different reason. I stood there in the sterile white light of the military hall, and no one knew what they were missing. No one knew, but they would. Because this wasn't the first time my father dismissed me. But it might be the last. Walk with me, to see who I've quietly become and what happened to the man who laughed at me that day. I didn't move. Not when the room shifted slightly in discomfort, not when the major to my right lowered his gaze, not even when the silence stretched into something brittle. The air had a strange weight to it, like a storm had passed but left the pressure behind. Ceremonies like this were supposed to be tight, choreographed, dignified. My father's comment cracked through all of that like a bullet through glass, and now nobody knew where to look. Some stared down at their polished shoes. Others kept their eyes fixed ahead, as if pretending nothing had happened would erase the tension. I could still hear the soft hum of the overhead lights, the faint rustle of starch against fabric as one of the officers beside me shifted his stance. Still, I didn't move. There's a certain quiet you learn to live inside after years of being underestimated. It hums under your skin. It becomes part of your breathing like a second pulse. In that moment, I leaned into it. Not because I was unshaken, but because I had learned how to contain the quake. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father's smirk flatten just slightly. He didn't expect the silence to hold. He didn't expect me to hold. He wore his old service blues medals proudly aligned across his chest like permanent credentials. He'd probably rehearsed that remark in his head, imagined it would land like a clever jab, a private joke between veterans. But it wasn't private. And it wasn't clever. It was cruel, and yet I felt no anger. Not even hurt, really. There's a kind of numbness that settles in when someone chips away at you for long enough. You stop bleeding, you just become stone. My eyes drifted toward the 4-star general just for a second. He'd lowered his card by now, but he was still watching me. Not my father, not the audience, me. He didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't look away. There was no applause. Promotions usually came with a brief moment of recognition, a nod from the commanding officer, perhaps a handshake, a quiet congratulations. But not now. Not yet. Because I hadn't stepped forward. Because I was still frozen in that space between two worlds, the one where I was always the daughter of, and the one where I'd become something else entirely. Maybe that was what the general saw, or maybe he already knew. They called the next name. A young man's sharp uniform chest visibly rising and falling with each breath. He stepped forward quickly as if grateful to break the spell. The ceremony resumed awkwardly like a song restarting on the wrong beat. But I wasn't listening. My thoughts had retreated somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter. All those nights spent reading terrain maps by the glow of a red light. All the years my hands bled from the ropes, from the climb, from the weight. All the times I was passed over, laughed off, forgotten. The missions no one knew I'd led, the decisions I'd made, the people I'd kept alive, some of whom now sat in this very room. And yet none of that made it into the program. None of it got read from the podium. None of it earned a speech or a salute. Just one moment, just one man lifting one card, and a silence that said more than words ever could. Eventually, my name would be called again. Eventually, I would walk forward, but not because of the ceremony, not because of the rank, because something inside me had shifted. because for the first time in years, I felt the weight begin to lift, not from the recognition, but from the knowing that I didn't need my father's approval, knowing that someone else saw, knowing that my presence alone, calm, steady, unflinching, was enough to speak volumes. That would be the last time he'd try to humiliate me in a room like this. I was done carrying his disappointment on my back. I had enough weight of my own. My father was always the voice in the next room, not yelling, not raging, just present, constant. I grew up with the sound of boots against tile orders clipped clean through the phone and the hum of metals clinking lightly against dress uniforms as he walked past me in the hallway. We lived in Fayetteville, close enough to Fort Bragg that the military didn't just shape our schedule, it shaped our entire reality. My mother handled the quiet side of that life-pressed uniforms, timed meals, quiet nods of support. But it was my father who filled the house not with noise but with expectation. He believed in rank, in command, in hierarchy. He believed in things earned the hard way, and he believed very deeply that I had not earned anything. I used to think maybe it was because I was his daughter, that if I'd been a son, he might have looked at me differently. But over time, I stopped making excuses. He didn't believe I had what it took, full stop. No asterisks, no caveats. When I told him I wanted to pursue a military career, he didn't stop me. He didn't argue. He just gave me a long, unreadable look and said, "Don't expect me to pull any strings." I never did. What I did expect, maybe naively, was that if I succeeded on my own, he'd see me differently. If I trained harder, ran faster, outlasted the doubt, he'd have no choice but to acknowledge it. That hope clung to me longer than I care to admit. But it never happened. At my commissioning ceremony, he stood stiffly at the backhands behind his back, not clapping, not smiling. Later, he told me I looked like I was playing dress-up. I was 23. There was always a reason, always a dismissive tilt of the head when I brought news of a qualification passed or a test aced. That one's standard, he'd say. That's not a big deal. He'd done it all before. He'd done it harder, longer, better. My mother, for what it's worth, tried to soften the blows. She'd bring me coffee on early mornings call, after rough deployments, send quiet emails with news clips about female officers getting promoted. Her pride was quiet like everything else about her. And when she passed, it was as if the last soft thing in our family disappeared. After that, my relationship with my father became even more functional, businesslike. He asked about my deployment locations and nothing more. When I earned my first leadership role, he said, "Let's hope you don't screw it up." He used to tell people I was in admin support. That's what he called my job. Not once did he refer to me as an officer. Not once did he introduce me by rank. When I was injured on a training op, nothing serious, just a dislocated shoulder, I called him from base medical. He said, "That's what happens when you're not built for this." He didn't mean it to hurt. That was the worst part. He meant it as truth, and I carried that version of the truth for years. It wormed its way into my spine, into the way I heard my own voice when giving commands, into the hesitation before sending a final report, into the way I explained myself even when no one had asked me to. The rest of the world called me lieutenant, then captain, then major. But in my father's world, I was just Natalie, the kid who'd chosen a uniform she couldn't fill. It wasn't just him. There were others too. Colleagues who assumed I got promoted for optics, men who called me ma'am with a smirk behind it. One senior officer once patted me on the back after a successful op and said, "Impressive for a girl." I said nothing. I always said nothing, because part of me thought maybe they're right. Maybe I am just barely holding it all together. But even in that silence, I was building something, quietly, out of sight. I just didn't know yet what it would become. It happened in year 11. I had just come off a rotation overseas, classified location, high heat, volatile region. My team had pulled off a containment op that could have gone very wrong. It didn't make headlines, but it kept a chain of events from spiraling. That was the job: do it well enough that no one ever knows you were there. When I returned, I was exhausted but proud, not because I wanted credit, just a nod, a quiet recognition, even just internally among my peers. But I walked into the debrief room and realized something had shifted. The unit I had led, the one I had trained, defended, and stood with, had been reassigned under a different officer, one of the younger ones, a man who frankly had far less field experience and had never led a live op. There was no explanation, no announcement, just a quiet redirection. I was given a desk, a glowing screen, a clipboard full of logistical support tasks. At first, I assumed it was temporary, just a routine shuffle. But when I asked command directly, the response was clipped. "We're reassessing structural placements. I didn't push." I knew better than to push. But something deeper settled in a chill. Not fear, not even anger. Just erasure. The kind of disappearance that doesn't come from failure, but from quiet, strategic sidelining. Like someone had decided I'd had enough visibility. Like someone didn't want my name in one more report. It would have been easier if I had done something wrong. But there was nothing, not even a reprimand. Just the silence of being made irrelevant. Then the rumors started. That I'd gone too far in the last op. That my choices had put others at risk. That I had overstepped my command. I knew exactly where it came from one liaison officer who had disagreed with my calls in the field. He'd backed down during the mission, but now he was whispering doubt into the right ears. None of it was official. No charges. No written complaints. Just a story being shaped quietly behind doors I wasn't invited to anymore. When my father found out, and he always found out, he didn't ask for my version. He didn't wait for explanation. He called me, didn't say hello, just said, "So you finally proved me right." I said nothing. He went on. "They don't push officers out for nothing. Natalie, you must have messed up." I could hear the breath between his sentences, the quiet satisfaction he didn't bother hiding. "Maybe now you'll stop pretending to be one of us." That call ended with silence. Not the hard kind, the hollow kind, the kind you sit inside for days after. In the weeks that followed, I was left off every deployment roster. Every mission planning team. When command called an all-officer briefing, I wasn't invited, not even accidentally. The corridors felt longer. My name, if it was spoken, dropped to a whisper. And still I showed up. I sat at the desk. I completed the logs. I offered quiet corrections to broken systems. No one saw it. Or maybe they did and chose not to. Some nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had truly lost control that day in the field, if my judgment had slipped, if they were right, if he was right. I had no defense. No one had filed a report. There was nothing I could appeal, just the slow, patient suffocation of professional exile. One afternoon as I walked past the old mission board, I saw a name listed that stopped me, Lieutenant Corin. One of my old team members. Younger. Less seasoned, now assigned to a mission I once would have led. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and looked away. In that moment, I felt something deeper than betrayal. I felt replacement. That's the kind of pain that doesn't bleed. It burrows. And still, I said nothing. No protest, no speech, no demand for reinstatement. I sat down at my station and wrote the most comprehensive asset requisition memo of the quarter. Because when the world thinks you're broken, the most defiant thing you can do is move with precision. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was how normal it started to feel. I began waking up without urgency. No morning briefs, no night cycles. Just the pale ceiling of my assigned quarters and the soft click of the HVAC system reminding me I was still here, still breathing, though nothing around me seemed to need that fact anymore. The desk work multiplied. Logistics, equipment tracking, writing up reports for operations I hadn't attended. Sometimes I wondered if anyone noticed the level of detail I included. Probably not. But it made the hours pass faster, and I needed something, anything, to keep me anchored. I stopped checking the mission boards. I stopped glancing toward the operations wing. Eventually, I stopped wearing my boots. Just flats. There was no point. One evening, after a 16-hour stretch, reconciling conflicting field returns, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror by the commissary entrance. I had aged. Not in the way deployments carve you, but in that quiet, slumping way that happens when your spine forgets it's holding anything up. My reflection looked like someone shrinking. someone being unmade. The next morning, I considered submitting a transfer request. Civilian liaison work, or logistics in a satellite office. Something simpler, lower stakes, less visible. Part of me told myself it was a strategic step back, a refocusing. But another part, the part I didn't speak to out loud, whispered the truth. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Maybe I never was. Maybe all along my father had been right. That thought stayed with me for days. It followed me into the mess hall, into the shower, into the moments I pressed my forehead against cold metal just to remind myself I was solid. And still I said nothing. No one ever pulled me aside. No one offered reassurance. My unit had moved on. The military, it seemed, had moved on. Even the walls felt colder. Then one night I opened my inbox to an unread message from a name I hadn't seen in years. Lieutenant Helena Moore. Helena and I had trained together in Fort Knox, same cycle, same sand in our eyes, same bruises under the ribs from when we both failed our first tower jump and swore we'd quit the next day. She had moved into intel work, often posted off-grid. We'd kept occasional contact, but time and command chains had stretched the distance. The message was brief. I don't know what they're saying about you, but I was there. And I remember who held the line. That op wouldn't have made it out without your call. Thought you should know I didn't forget. Below that was a single attachment, a blacked-out document with one redacted section still visible, a field commendation filed anonymously through a shadow unit. I knew immediately which op it referred to. I stared at the screen long after the words stopped moving. I didn't cry. I didn't clench my fists. I just breathed differently for the first time in weeks. Someone remembered. Someone saw. Not in the headlines, not in the command briefings, but in the shadows, someone had written my name beside the word integrity. I printed the document. Not for proof for weight. I needed to feel something that was mine again. I slipped it between the pages of a training manual and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. That night I slept with the lights off for the first time in months. The next day, I signed a classified interest memo, a quiet application to a unit that specialized in operations with high risk and zero publicity. I didn't know if I would be accepted. I didn't know if it was even still active, but I submitted it anyway. I wasn't coming back for recognition. I wasn't coming back to prove anyone wrong. I just needed to find the part of myself I hadn't failed. And somewhere I believed she was still out there waiting to be used again. The application was acknowledged 2 weeks later. No fanfare, no meetings. Just a secure envelope slipped into my inbox marked with a unit code I didn't recognize. Inside a briefing packet partially redacted and a short note unsigned. We don't need loud, we need exact. If you're still that, report to Grid Echo 7 by 0430 Tuesday. That was it. No rank, no department, not even a named contact, just coordinates. Just time. I didn't hesitate. At 04:15, I stood outside a concrete building deep in a low-visibility sector of base operations, a wing I had walked past 100 times without ever noticing the reinforced access panel. The guard at the door glanced at my ID, paused, then offered a single nod. Inside, the air was colder, denser. There were no decorations, no welcome. Just rows of encrypted terminals and 4 officers already reviewing a mission file. A man about 10 years older than me turned from the far wall. I recognized him instantly, Colonel Abbott, known for his brutal efficiency and a lack of public presence. He said nothing, just made eye contact, gave a subtle nod, then pointed to a seat. That was my welcome. The briefing unfolded in silence. An overseas operation had failed containment. A rogue cell had seized a consulate family during a diplomatic relay. The media didn't know yet, but they would unless it was handled with surgical precision. There would be no press releases, no ribbons, no room for mistakes. I was assigned to lead the extraction logistics, but informally I could tell the unit was testing me, watching to see if the woman who'd vanished into paperwork still had tactical blood running under her skin. They didn't have to wait long. By that evening, I'd redrawn the route overlay, cut the evacuation window by 40%, and pinpointed a missed security gap in the perimeter files, one that would have cost 2 lives on entry. I didn't say much. I just handed over the update packet. The colonel reviewed it silently. Then, without looking up, said Update Ops Command with Kerrigan's revisions. That was it. No compliment, no handshake. But it was the first time in months someone used my name in a room like it mattered. Over the next 10 days, we prepped. Every moment was movement. I ran, simulations reviewed, sat images, refined code drops, and slept in 2-hour shifts with boots still on. I didn't think about my father. I didn't think about the ceremony. I thought only about the team, the plan, and the mission clock that never stopped ticking. No one asked what had happened to me before, and I didn't offer. But one night around 0300, while double-checking an entry schedule, one of the younger officers, Ramirez, leaned over and said, "Word is you used to lead recon like this. Some of the guys thought you got out." I didn't look up. I just said quietly, "I don't lead from behind a keyboard." And he nodded. That was all. The operation launched on a Friday. It ended before sunrise Sunday. All hostages recovered. 0 casualties. Clean extraction. The report listed 6 contributing officers by code name. Mine was third. That following Tuesday, I was called into Colonel Avit's office. He didn't offer me a seat. He didn't smile. He just said reassignment request. Your call. On the table in front of him were 2 folders. One was marked with my current post logistical support safe zone base. The other was black, unmarked. I didn't open either. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I want to be where precision matters more than noise." He gave the faintest twitch of a smile, maybe approval, maybe something else. Then he handed me the black file. I didn't tell anyone. Not my former unit. Not even Helena. I just moved. Like mist shifting across steel. The next month was pure momentum, covert deployments, secure extractions, 0 ceremony. I led, quietly wrote tactical doctrine updates, coordinated remote fallback strategies. I signed every document with just my ID tag, no title, no rank. And yet, everyone in the room turned when I spoke. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't revenge, it was return, and this time I didn't care who saw. The invitation came folded into a standard issue envelope. I almost didn't open it. It sat in my inbox for 2 days before I touched it, a single sheet with stiff lettering embossed at the top. Annual Joint Forces Recognition Ceremony, Fort Banner. Officers Pavilion Promotion Acknowledgement and Public Commendations. I didn't need to read the rest. I already knew. They were making it official. My promotion to Lieutenant Colonel, in public, in uniform, in front of people who had once erased me. I thought about not going. I didn't need it, not anymore. But something quieter inside me said, "You're not going for them." I stood in front of the mirror that morning, fastening the bars onto my collar. I didn't think of my father. I didn't think of who might be there or who might look away. I thought of the 2 lives saved when I spotted that entry gap. I thought of the evac team that made it back with 0 injuries. I thought of the silence I had walked through and the precision that had never left me. The ceremony was held under filtered sunlight in a steel-framed pavilion draped in flags. Folding chairs arranged in brutal symmetry, rows of faces, uniforms starched and still. I arrived early, sat in the 3rd row, alone. My name was 4th on the roster. They called names, applauded, handed out medals I'd never heard of. Then someone said, "Mine first name, middle initial, last name," followed by the new rank. I stood, and that's when I saw him. My father. 3 rows back to the left, in dress blues, expression flat, arms crossed. He hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't told me he'd come. But there he was, at my ceremony. And I knew it wasn't for pride. It was to see whether I'd pretend I belonged. I took the steps slowly. The officer at the podium extended a hand. I shook it without flinching, turned to face the audience as protocol demanded. The claps were polite, standard, until someone behind me moved. I heard the shift before I turned. From the back row, a figure stood. A man in deep navy. A 4-star general. He didn't approach the podium. He didn't speak. He raised a card, red, gleaming and unmistakable. Tier clearance. Direct commendation authority. I froze. The air changed. Every officer in that pavilion recognized what that card meant. A personal commendation. Off record. reserved only for operations beyond standard merit. Classified work. Real work. He nodded once, not to the crowd. To me. Then, in a voice calm but sharp enough to slice the room in half, he said, "Lieutenant Colonel Kerrigan, we haven't forgotten." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It roared. No one moved. No one dared. My father looked at me. For the first time in my adult life, truly looked at me. And he didn't speak. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Because in that one gesture, in that one card, that one acknowledgement, the truth uncoiled in front of everyone. The woman he had spent years dismissing was now being commended by a man who could have her flown out on command. Saluted in silence, validated not with words, but with rank, with trust, with legacy. I stood there, spine-straight, eyes ahead. I said nothing, because I didn't need to. The room had already heard enough. The ceremony ended like most do. Photo ops handshake lines, the faint buzz of post-formality relief. I stood off to the side, alone, fingers loosely laced behind my back, letting the chaos swirl without stepping into it. The general was gone, just like that. No goodbye, no further gesture. He didn't need to stay. People glanced at me differently now, a subtle shift. No one spoke of the card, but they didn't have to. The military runs on codes and clearance, but it also runs on reputation. And the room had seen mine declared in full color. My father didn't approach. He remained seated long after the last name was called, as if gravity had doubled on him. I felt no need to move toward him. He wasn't the audience anymore. Later that evening, back in my quarters, I found a folder slipped under my door. No note, no return address. Just a heavy envelope with a seal I recognized but hadn't seen since the assignment, black-inked, pressure-pressed insignia of Joint Special Operations. Inside a full mission brief. Unredacted. It was the operation that got me sidelined. The one they said I mishandled. The one whispered about but never reviewed openly. Now it was cleared for release, at least internally. And this version told a different story. My story. The brief was brutally thorough. Dates, maps, comlogs, transcripts of internal debates, satellite overlays showing how my decision, the very one I was accused of overstepping, rerouted our team away from an ambush. 27 lives saved. One of the senior officers, unnamed but clearly high-ranking, had initially vetoed my call. But when comms cut out and I made the decision anyway, I'd preserved not just the team, but the intelligence package that was the entire point of the mission. In the conclusion section, the part no one ever reads out loud, a notation caught my eye. Acted decisively without regard for protocol, and in doing so preserved the integrity of the mission. Recommend commendation under Tier 3 protocol. Leadership demonstrated exceeds current rank. It was dated 6 weeks before I was reassigned. 6 weeks before I was quietly removed. 6 weeks before my name was scrubbed from the mission board. I stared at that line, exceeds current rank, and felt the floor of the past 2 years tilt slightly. Someone had known. They'd known the truth the whole time. They just hadn't acted. Until now. 2 days later, my file was updated. I received a ping on the secure channel. My officer clearance had been elevated, and beside my digital profile was a tag I'd never had before Tier 3 blacklist. Lifted. Clear for command. Eligible for Joint Task Directive. The blacklist. That's what had done it. A quiet mark on an internal database, not a demotion, not a formal punishment, just a flag. It explained everything, the sudden reassignment, the silence, the shut doors. They hadn't condemned me. They'd shelved me. For optics, for safety, for the chain of command. And now someone had decided I'd done my time. The truth was out. Not on social media, not in a press release, but in the only places that mattered, in the mission logs, in the clearance levels, in the quiet nod of a 4-star general. I didn't tell my father, but I know he knows. A week after the ceremony, a package arrived at my doorstep. No name, but the return address was from a P.O. box he used when deployed. Inside, one of his old campaign ribbons. Folded, clean, no note, just the ribbon. I didn't frame it, didn't wear it. I slid it into the back of the drawer with the commendation printout from Helena. Not as proof, not even as forgiveness, just as a record, because I had finally learned I didn't need acknowledgement to exist, and I didn't need an apology to rise. I didn't stay long at Fort Banner. 3 weeks after the ceremony, I accepted a transfer to a mobile unit stationed in Northern Europe. The work is rotational quiet and often classified. We don't wear full dress unless someone dies. We don't post our movements. We don't do press. It suits me. The team I lead now is small 7 officers, 2 of them younger than I was when I first took command. One of them reminds me of Helena, same sharp eyes, same quiet determination. I watch the way she checks everything twice, how she speaks sparingly, but listens like the room belongs to her. She'll lead one day, maybe better than I did, and when she does, I'll be somewhere nearby making sure no one shelves her for politics. That's the work now. Not just to serve, but to make space. I don't talk about what happened at Fort Banner. When people ask about the gap in my public file, I just smile and say, different command chain. They don't need the story, only the results. And the results are simple. The missions work. The team listens. No one questions why my decisions land where they do. At night, I sometimes read through old field notes, the ones from the years no one noticed me. The ones that carried red ink rejection stamps or were never logged in the official archives. I don't feel anger when I read them, just precision. Just the rhythm of someone who never stopped showing up even when no one saw it. That's the kind of strength I trust now, the quiet kind. The kind that holds a room without raising its voice. I've been asked more than once whether I'll pursue higher rank, whether I'll go for full colonel or even apply for strategic command. Maybe one day. But for now, I have everything I came for. Not medals, not clearance, not even redemption. What I have is agency. I go where I choose. I speak only when it matters. And when I walk into a room, people stand a little straighter. Even now, my father hasn't said the words. No apology, no admission. Just that ribbon folded gathering soft dust in the drawer. I'm fine with that, because I finally understood I was never meant to inherit his pride. I was meant to outgrow it, and I have. When they wouldn't give me a seat at the table, I didn't beg. I built the table, and now others sit at it quieter, stronger, unafraid. That is enough.